So I'm pleased to see that it is not swept under the rug, and there's public discussion both about the authority and about the corruption. The person just said that it's autocracy or it's not a democracy, and it has nothing to do with reality. It is true that prior to 2013, under Yanukovych, there has been endemic corruption. The government and the president, in fact, forced companies to give shares to them, took over private businesses, and divested or diverted public funds. But during the Revolution of Dignity, Yanukovych was ousted, and the anti-corruption reform started. Over the last several years, there has been a network of anti-corruption law enforcement agencies, anti-corruption court, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, special anti-corruption prosecutions. It has been very difficult to get them through. Some areas of the economy have been cleaned up. For example, the central bank and the banking system. Over 100 banks, half of the banking system, have been shut down and cleaned up over the last 5 years. And that's exactly why the Ukrainian economy didn't tank and there was no bank runs in the beginning of the war, which is unprecedented actually for other countries. Electronic procurement in non-military has been cleaned up. Some state-owned enterprises, corporate governance has been implemented. In others, the progress has been mixed. So it's an ongoing battle. But in 2014, there was a culture shift because essentially corruption was everyone realized, the public realized that because of corruption, the military couldn't do anything and the institutions couldn't do anything to respond to the Russian annexation of Crimea and to the aggression in the East. Now it's very different.
And yet, though, he's had to fire 12 people because presumably this corruption has not shifted since 2014. And these are big figures. These are people also involved in the war effort. These are people who have been taking money that's provided to the war effort and enriching themselves in it. The worst thing you can almost do as a leader, a senior figure in a war, is to do that, where you impoverish your fellow men and women because you're taking stuff for yourself during a war. And that's still going on.
Well, some of it is and has to be cleaned up, and that has been a problem everywhere, including Ukraine. There has been 5 people or 4 deputy ministers removed. One of them was the Deputy Minister of Defense, and there is one specific contract of procurement that is debated about the inflated prices, and it does look bad. There is also another deputy minister which was removed. He was actually arrested by the law enforcement on the accusation of bribes. And this is a classic example of polarization. You take this evidence and some people say, listen, this is great. Ukraine is fighting corruption. There's a culture shift. Law enforcement agencies are finally working. While others will say, listen, this is just another sign of endemic corruption. I'm in the camp, being here on the ground, being trained in the West, and having studied institutions as an economist. I'm in the camp that it is a dynamic situation and Ukraine is improving, but we are not out of the woods yet.
What about the argument that as the war has progressed, the grip of authority has got increased by President Zelensky? And this does happen in war. I think people understand that when you have a war where there's one aim, which is to kick Russia out of illegally invading your country, the person at the top becomes very, very powerful. All decisions run through him. Is there any concern, in your view, that he's becoming a more autocratic figure?
So while I have not seen the direct evidence or indirect evidence of this, so I don't see, no one tells, the companies are not being taken over, no one attacks the journalist. In fact, I would argue that the fact that the journalist can initiate the national security type of contracts, procurement investigations, that's a sign that the media are free, or at least part of the media is doing their job very effectively. Of course, there is this concern. This concern that centralization of power can potentially shift and post-war we will have issues. That is always there, and that's partly why the civil society is speaking up. So I'm pleased to see that it is not swept under the rug, and there's public discussion both about the authority and about the corruption.
Really interesting stuff. Timothy, thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.